I guess I could shit on X-Play a little more. I've been really astounded. I never really watched X-Play. I think it was pretty much off the air by the time I was even... There's a lot of stuff that I missed on TV that technically was airing while I was a kid, but I never watched because I stopped watching TV when I was like 12 or 11 or something. I think when I was 11 I stopped watching TV. So I was just never... Like, I never watched Adult Swim. I never watched Adult Swim as a kid except in like very rare instances where I was up late. So I just... By the time I was old enough, I was just watching stuff on the internet. So, I totally missed Toonami because of that, which is kind of funny. Yeah, so, like... my mouth. What was I? So, like, I never watched a lot of X-Play, but it's really fascinating, in a bad way, to watch some of these old reviews. And it hits, like... I was talking about, there's this review for, like, Proto Dude, Mega Man News Guy. He was posting some old X-Play reviews of Mega Man games. Wow. When I say being, like, I would be ashamed of this, the review for Battle Network 6, it's not even a review. It's 3.5 minutes of Adam Sessler going, oh my god, they made another one? Can you believe they made another one? Wow, I fucking hate Mega Man. Wow, they made another one. I'm so tired of this. They made another one. Wow. Fuck, I don't even get to play it. And it's not even like a... Like, you don't even know what the... You barely find what the... It's just, oh, yeah, it's like a fucking JRPG. Who gives a fuck? I didn't really play it. It's like... That was, like, cringe. It was cringe-inducingly bad. It's not even a review. And you look at some of their other reviews, like Mega Man ZX. Really cool game. I would recommend Mega Man ZX a lot. It's, I hate calling it Dark Souls, but it's like a Mega Man Dark Souls, in terms of, like, design and, like, systems. Or not really system, but, like, the way that the game is structured. Also, way before Dark Souls, which is neat. Check out Mega Man ZX. Very underrated. And ZX Advent. And it's Morgan Webb, and she's talking... And okay, so this is, like, more of, like, the problem. I was really just... How do I describe this? There's a style of review, we'll call it, for the sake of being not confusing, because I don't really think of it as a review, where it's not really a review, that I get annoyed by, and it happens less and less now, thankfully. But the review will basically just not be a review. It's a summary of the things in the game, and then, like, a couple positive and negative comments, and then that's it. And then a review score. Like, this whole review of Mega Man ZX, a genuinely, like, a game with some really interesting ideas, like, interesting ways of pushing the Mega Man formula forward, like, very creative. Like, oh, let's take the traditional Mega Man structure, but instead of picking a boss, it's like a whole world, and you can basically go out and fight the bosses in any order by, like, exploring the world, and they have, like, different areas and things. Oh, that's really neat. It just ends up becoming, yeah, it's like they made another one, but it's got, like, this and this and this, and there's, like, this in it and that in it, and I got lost, so I didn't really like it. Yeah, 3 out of 5. Like, what? The only thing I learned from that was, like, what I could learn on the back of the box. Plus, oh, you get lost. I'm imagining someone watching that review and missing out on Mega Man ZX, which they otherwise would have loved. And I can't believe it. I can't believe stuff like this was so just accepted. This was just okay. Like, just like a fucking nothing state. So vapid. Such a vapid program. I'm sure there were reviews that were better. They probably all weren't like that. But the amount, like, what they would let slip, like, the standards were not high. I think someone phrased it as, it was like the shock of seeing video games on TV was enough. And like that was a type of game criticism we'll call it, that like I saw a lot of growing up, just these incredibly shallow takes and like analyses of games. And it's one of the things that really inspired me. So like when I was in high school, I was on the high school newspaper, and it was around when the Spider-Man PS4 came out. And I remember sitting next to, I really wanted to get onto the arts and entertainment section. I was on like, not news, it was, I was on the section of the newspaper that would basically just go around like interviewing staff or going to like new places, new businesses around town. What's the new movie theater like? It was like that area. And I really wanted to be on arts and entertainment. Because that's what I actually like writing about. If I'm going to be on a newspaper. I don't want to write about Benghazi. So I remember sitting in like a newspaper meeting, and the moderator for the newspaper club he would basically just go over, we would just have a check-in of like, you're doing this, you're doing this, you're doing this. Do you know what article you're doing? Okay, cool. Write that down in the schedule so he knows what's going on. And there's this dude who was reviewing Spider-Man PS4. And his friend turns to him and he goes, do you even own that game? And he goes, nah, but like, I'll just like ask a friend who he has it. I'm just going to ask him. And I couldn't believe, my jaw dropped. My jaw hit the floor. And that review, which is what it was called, a review of Spider-Man PS4, ran in that newspaper. And I read it. Yeah, it's just a fucking summary of the things that are in the game, because it's clearly just, it was the what was his name? What was his name? It was the Jose Pereira method. Yeah, just ask your friend. I don't gotta play it. Just ask your friend about it. And like, that boggled my mind that could pass as a review. I realize I'm applying very high standards to a high school newspaper. But like, that was like a big thrust for me. Like, okay, I want to actually write a real review of a game. And I did. I would actually write, I wish I had a lot more word count. I was usually limited to like 500 words, which is like nothing for how much I have to talk about. Yeah, like, I would actually try to get pretty concise review. Like, I wrote a review for The Outer Worlds, because I liked The Outer Worlds quite a bit. And I wrote a review where I actually talked about, yeah, here's the things that the game is about, ostensibly, from a story, gameplay-wise. Here is how good it is. I can't go into too much detail, but like, here's my actual review of the game. There's this cool thing in the game. There's this thing in the game that I think is like this. It's an actual review with like an opinion. It's subjective opinions based on objective facts about a piece of media. Yeah, like man. Just these like summaries. That was in high school. That was one of the things that like my teachers would tell me, like, avoid summarizing. If you're writing about a book for an essay, or you're writing about history, whatever, for your essay, avoid summarizing. Summarizing by itself adds nothing to the piece. Only summarize, like the rule was don't summarize. But obviously every rule is there to scare you into avoiding it so that you form good habits. Those are what a lot of rules are for. In like creative fields, I mean. Yeah, every rule can be broken if you can do it well. The thing is that I don't trust you to do it well, so I'm going to tell you to just not even try until you're more competent. By the time you're more competent, you'll already have ideas for how to actually do it well. you'll understand, you'll be wise enough to be able to not make the beginner mistakes that a beginner would make when they want to do something, when they want to do something, form bad habits. So like, when I write my videos, I don't think of my videos as reviews, but I guess they basically fall into that category. I don't write them with the thought in mind that they're reviews, even if that's what they are, and I can basically acknowledge that they are, but I don't write them like that. I try to only summarize a game enough so that the viewer can understand it, right? Like, it's also very different because when I write a video on a specific game or a couple games where I'm talking about my thoughts on them, I'm reviewing my thoughts on them, I'm doing so, number one, these are games that most people haven't played. I talk about obscure stuff. Number two, I like to go in depth, and I like to go in depth on my emotional response to a game, and what I think of it. So that kind of requires me to be a little more in depth. Let's say summarize a little more for the purposes of walking you through the game, so that I can actually tell you what I think about all these things. There'll be, long stretches of a game sometimes that I basically can just summarize in a sentence or even part of a sentence, right? For the purposes of making the video make sense to the viewer so that you understand how we got from the last sentence to what I'm talking about in this one. And you're not, like, just hung out to dry, like, wait, what? Where are we? Huh? To me, that's what's, like, I think it's acceptable, right? I think that's, like, a way that you can bend the rule. Like, yeah, you can summarize, but it should be for a purpose. A lot of people just summarize because they don't know what to talk about. They don't know what else to talk about, so they just say, this is there, this is there, this is there, this is there, and they're like, yeah, I talked about the game, I talked about the movie, I talked about the book, I talked about the song. But, like, there was no analysis. The analysis is, like, in my opinion, what actually makes it a review. A lot of these, like, old mainstream reviews end up just being big summaries. That was, like, a lot of complaints about old IGN reviews. What site was it? What site was it that dropped review scores? I think it was Polygon. It was Polygon. Eurogamer. It was Eurogamer, not Polygon. So, like, Eurogamer wrote this article about God of War Ragnarok. Now, God of War Ragnarok, it was a review of God of War Ragnarok. God of War Ragnarok was not a game that I played, nor one that I had interest in. But I really enjoyed this review. And most of the review, I don't think they mentioned the gameplay a single time. All they talked about was what they thought about the narrative and the way the narrative was presented. And what was so great about that is that if you couldn't, if there was a score at the end of the review, it would have been a shitty review. But because there's no score, I think it works. And I'll tell you why. Because you spend the whole article talking about the narrative and the presentation. Basically talk nothing about things like the gameplay, the controls, the systems. Then if you put a score at the end of that, it's like, what? You didn't even talk, like, you're giving a whole, it's like, what did you even, it's not an actual holistic, when you have, I think a review score forces the reviewer to actually holistically view the game. Like, what are actually all of the aspects of it? But instead, when you just don't have to worry about that shit, when you don't have to spend time talking about the gameplay, maybe you just don't have anything interesting to say about the gameplay. Instead, you get to just write about the narrative, which is the part that actually interested the author. So instead, you end up with this article that I found way more interesting and way more thought-provoking about the story and how it kind of represents Because it wasn't just, here's the things that happen in the story. It's like, well, this is basically what the story's about. These are the themes. And it's interesting because this is a AAA game. This is a huge game. What does this mean for like AAA games as like an art? It's like a representative of gaming. It compared it a lot to like Marvel movies and things like that. And you end up with a much more interesting article that, yeah, it's like a review, I guess, of God of War Ragnarok, but it's something that the author clearly wanted. It's almost like something I would do on this podcast. Like, I don't give out review scores, right? Let's say I would probably, if I talked about God of War Ragnarok on this podcast, it would probably be something very much like it. I might have maybe not exactly like that review, because I'd probably talk more about the gameplay and stuff like that, things that I care about. But like, when I talk about a game, sometimes I just ramble for like 40 minutes about like, oh, well, how is this in like the overall trend of this, and like, what does this say about the medium and things like that. And I'll just talk about shit like that. And that was kind of the sense that this game spurred some interesting thoughts from the author, and they just kind of wrote an article about that. And you don't have to get mad because they're not making a judgment over the whole game, over every aspect of it. Games are, I think, one of the hardest mediums to actually give a review score to, because there's so many things going on. There's narrative, there's music, there's in a lot of games, obviously, some more than others. And that's also kind of the problem with a movie. It's like, there's a story, there's acting, there's music, there's cinematography, there's editing, if you're really trying to, go deep. How about the editing? And if you're a movie reviewer, I feel like it's way easier to give a number score to movies. If with a game, it's like, damn, yeah, like, this game's story sucks ass, but it's fun as fuck. Like, I had such a good time with it. I just didn't like it when the cutscenes were happening. Like, and like, this was good, but this was but in this part of the game, because they're also so long, right? Like, well, this is good, and then by the end of the game, it's like kind of not great, but this is bad, and then it kind of gets a little better towards the end. And it's weird. It's like there's so many layers to a video game that it can have. Sometimes games are just gameplay. Sometimes games are mostly just a narrative. Sometimes games are just weird. And it's like, all this has to kind of be thrown together, and somehow you have to come up with a rating system that actually accounts for all of these things. Like, if I did serious game reviews and I wanted to make my channel into a game review website, game review channel, I would not want to do review scores. I would probably, if I had to come up with some kind of metric, I would probably come up with something that, I don't know, was a little more abstract, I guess. Like, the way that different things make me feel. Like, sometimes I think it's just not important to talk about certain things. Do you give if I talk about the storyline of Doom the original Doom from 1993, why would I even bother talking about the story? Why would I even bother giving a score? Like, some people do that. They break up like into like categories, right? They break up a game into categories that they score individual. Why would I even bother giving Doom 93 a score for story at all? Doesn't fucking matter. It's Doom. It's like the most anti-story game you could have. I'm talking about like a written, structured narrative. Obviously, Doom has a story. The gameplay tells a story, but like, it's like, what? Oh, the character, what? But that's a great ass game. That's one of my favorite games ever. But it's got like no story, and it doesn't care about it. Like, I wouldn't even want to do it. I think review scores are I think review scores are... It's funny, because I think review scores are generally, like, not helpful. But sometimes, even given that, I'll see a score sometimes, I'm like, all right, but like for real. I think the most classic one was like giving God when IGN gave God Hand a 3 out of 10. You're like, okay, for real, dude? Like, seriously? It's at least enough of a statement about the quality of the game that you're like, you're serious, dude? Yeah.